Aerosmith's Pump may have been one of the most successful albums, but does it truly live up to the hype? Or is it overshadowed by their earlier work? In this video, I'm going to talk about how a rock band from the 70s transformed themselves to fit into the 80s musical panorama. I will talk about how high the album reached on the charts and how many times it was certified platinum. I will also talk about the 4 top 40 singles from this album and how this album is tied for second place as their best-selling studio album in their career, which fell only a few million albums short of their best-selling album, which came out in the 70s. This album also achieved a few honors for the first time in the band's history, but despite all the success, not everything was smooth sailing, as there was some controversy that the band had to face. I will be talking about all that and more in this video, so let's get into it. I remember when this album came out, I really liked this album. I thought it might be for nostalgic reasons because it came out during a turning point in my life. I bought this album around the same time I went away to college for the first time. So in other words, I moved out of my parents' house for the first time, and I brought my music collection with me to my dorm room. This was one of the newest albums that I had. I remember I used to listen to it all the time. I would bring it to parties, and we would put it on there. It was, or it probably is, one of my favorite albums by Aerosmith. I don't know if it's because it came out at the time, but it's the type of album I could listen to over and over and never get tired of. One of the reasons I like this album because it had a sound that was close to the other bands I was listening to at that time. So let's talk more about the production and how they achieved that sound. Pump is their 10th studio album by Aerosmith. It was released on September 12th, 1989. It's celebrating 35 years. This was the follow-up to Permanent Vacation from 1987. So in a way, this can be considered to be their second album from the period which, for the purposes of this video, we'll call their 80s metal period. This was when they released a series of albums that had a sound that was closer to the glam metal scene of the 80s. Permanent Vacation did pretty well on the charts. It had a few hits, but Pump was more successful. The production for this album started in December of 1988 when the band started to write and rehearse a few of the songs. They wrote a total of 19 songs, and they took each of the songs and divided them up into 2 categories. The ones that have potential to be radio hits, and then the other ones. The album was produced by Bruce Fairbairn, and he wanted the songs in the album to be catchy with lots of hooks. Then, in January of 1989, the band went to Vancouver to record at the same studio where Bruce Fairbairn had recorded Bon Jovi's Slippery When Wet album. They were there at the same time that Motley Crue were recording their Dr. Feelgood album. It was even reported that Mick Mars's guitar sound leaked from the door next door. So eventually, they finished recording the album and they were happy with the results. According to the band, they wanted to have a little bit more freedom as opposed to the strictness they had with Permanent Vacation. So according to Joe Perry, they didn't want to be bound by any of the rules because of this. A lot of the songs had instrumental interludes. These instrumentals were done in collaboration with a musician, Randy Rain Roich. And if you're wondering what the meaning of the album Pump is, according to Brad Whitford, they said that now that they were off drugs, they were all pumped up. As for the lyrics, the album didn't have lyrics in the album booklet because they were afraid of the PMRC giving them problems with all the sex and drugs references, but they included them in the tour program. The album cover shows 2 trucks with cargo beds removed and the markings on the hoods have been replaced with letters F-I-N-E, which is one of the songs I'll talk about later, but if you want to know that acronym, it stands for F'd Up, Insecure, Neurotic, Emotional. Let me talk about the sound of the album. The album had a sound similar to Permanent Vacation, but the big difference was this one was closer to their classic rock sounds as opposed to Permanent Vacation, which had more of that glam metal type of sound. I think Pump had stronger songs that were more memorable, but then again, it may be my bias as I was never a big fan of Permanent Vacation. It kind of bridged the gap between their sound of the 70s and the sound they were going for with this trilogy of albums that would be considered to be their pop metal or glam metal albums. Permanent Vacation was also a little cleaner, and the album after this, Get a Grip, was much more commercial. But I don't know, what do you guys think? Do you think Pump successfully bridges Aerosmith's raw 70s style with a more polished 80s sound? Why don't you let me know in the comments, but let me continue. I did a video on Get a Grip, and I will link that to the end screen as well. So please subscribe. I have a large collection of album reviews on this channel. So let me talk about the singles, but before I do that, why don't you give this video a thumbs up? It helps me with the YouTube algorithm. The first single was Love in an Elevator, which came out before the release of this album. The song was a hit. It peaked at number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100, and according to Steven Tyler, it's based on a true story. One time he was making out with a woman in an elevator and the doors opened and he had to wait for them to close. And he said it was the longest few seconds of his life waiting for those doors to close. The next single was Jamie's Got a Gun. It was released on November 9th, 1989. The song peaked at number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100. The lyrics were controversial. It's about a girl who gets a gun and kills her father as revenge for the abuse she experienced from him. And the song was also Aerosmith's first Grammy win. The song won the award for the best rock performance by a duo or group with vocals. The lyrics were written by Steven Tyler, and they were written over a long period of time, and they were inspired by stories by people he had met while in rehab, and since a lot of stories were very moving for him, he wrote a song about it. The third single was What It Takes. This was the official power ballad of the album. It was written by Steven Tyler, Joe Perry, and Desmond Child. Now, if you didn't know, Desmond Child is a famous songwriter and hit maker. I've talked about him in some of my previous videos. He helped write their previous power ballad, which was Angel from Permanent Vacation, and they wanted the song to have a unique sound. So that's why they used some different instruments, such as keyboards and an accordion. The lyrics of the song are about getting over a past relationship, and the lyrics also make reference to the song Fine from the same album. There was one more single, that is The Other Side. This was released on June 6, 1990. This one has a short instrumental in the beginning called Dulcimer Stomp, and the song also won an MTV Video Music Award for Best Rock Video in 1991. And the song didn't do as well as the other singles, but it wasn't too bad. It peaked at number 22 on the US Billboard Hot 100. Now let me talk about some of the album cuts. The first two songs on the album are Young Lust and Fine, which I mentioned before, so you should know what it stands for. The first track, Young Lust, is a hard rocker. I thought this one had a sound reminiscent of their sound of the 70s. It was very upbeat, and I don't need to tell you what the lyrics are about. The title pretty much says it all. After this was the song Fine, which was another hard rocker. I thought this was another song that brought back that bluesy sound from the 70s, had a lot of raunchy lyrics, so I thought it was a classic Aerosmith type of song. Track number 4 is Monkey on My Back, and this is a song about drug abuse, something that was a big problem for the band during the 70s. They even make reference to one of their albums in the third verse where they say, where do you draw the line when all your friends are dying? Because they had an album called Draw the Line, which was recorded at the peak of their substance abuse years. Then there was a song, My Girl, and this one had some upbeat guitar fills, and Steven Tyler delivers a great vocal performance. Then there was a song, Don't Get Mad, Get Even. Steven Tyler plays some harmonica on the track, and it's a catchy song. And after this, Hoodoo/Voodoo Medicine Man, which had an instrumental intro. It was very psychedelic in the intro. And then the song was one of the slower, bluesier tracks with some cool guitar riffs. But as I mentioned before, the album came with some legal problems. A local rock band named Pump sued the band Aerosmith for service mark infringement, but Aerosmith won the case. And then they had some other legal problems when the songwriting team of Holland, Dozier Holland, threatened to sue the band over the main melody in the Aerosmith song The Other Side, which had a sound similar to a song Standing in the Shadows of Love, which was a 1966 hit, recorded by the Four Tops. Standing in the shadows of love, I'm getting ready. It's got to be like the devil in the deep blue sea. But as part of the settlement, Aerosmith agreed to add Holland, Dozier Holland to the songwriting credit for The Other Side. But in the end, the album was a major success for the band. The 4 singles that I mentioned before were all top 40 hits. The album sold 7 million copies in the US, which is 7 times platinum. The album is tied with Get a Grip for selling the same amount of copies, but this was not their best-selling album of all time. And that honor goes to Toys in the Attic, which sold 9 million copies since its release in 1975. As I mentioned before, this album had a number of firsts for the band, such as its first Grammy win, its first #1 song on the mainstream rock charts as well. Now for my final thoughts, I think this is one of my favorite Aerosmith albums of all time. It's the only album from the later period I would rank in their top 5 albums. I've always thought of their albums from the 70s to be their best, but this one holds a special place for me. In the meantime, let me know your comments. And what do you think of Pump? Check out this video I did on Get a Grip, which I continued the story with their equally successful follow-up album. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.